The Ottoman Empire's rapid expansion throughout the 5th–10th century has puzzled historians for years. How did this relatively new Turkish state capture so much land in such a short amount of time? Now we're going to answer that question today. But first, if you like learning about history and languages, then make sure to subscribe. So let's talk about the Ottoman Empire and how they were able to expand so quickly. The empire was founded by a Turkish tribe known as the Ottomans, who took their name from a 13th century chieftain named Osman Bey by the early 1400s. They controlled much of northwest Anatolia and were led by a man named Murad I. He would go on to conquer the Byzantine city of Adrianople or Edirne in 1362 and make it the new capital of his empire. It was also around this time that the Ottomans began taking their empire seriously, meaning they started to organize. They created a centralized government, codified their laws, and started building a navy. All of this occurred under Murad's successors, Bayezid I and Mehmed the Conqueror. And speaking of Mehmed the Conqueror, he is probably the most famous of all the early Ottoman rulers. And it's all because of what he did next. In 1453, Mehmed besieged the Byzantine capital of Constantinople, and after a month-long siege, the city fell. This event marked the end of the Eastern or Byzantine Empire, which had been around since the fall of Rome in 476. But it was more than just the end of an era. It also demonstrated how strong the Ottoman Turks had become. And that's not even the half of it, because they were just getting started. Throughout the rest of the 5th–10th century, the Ottomans conquered large parts of the Balkans, North Africa, and the Middle East. By the end of the century, their territory stretched from the gates of Vienna in the north to the borders of Yemen in the south. That is a huge area, and one that no other power could match. So what made them so successful? Well, the first factor was gunpowder. The Ottomans weren't the first people to use gunpowder weapons like cannons and rifles, but they were among the first to use them effectively. During the siege of Constantinople, for example, they used a massive cannon called Big Basiliscus to bombard the city. They shot it with such force that its sound could be heard 30 kilometers away. To put that in perspective, that's about the distance between Washington, D.C. and Fredericksburg, Virginia. On top of that, the Ottomans were also quick to adopt new technologies from other cultures, which gave them a significant advantage over their enemies. For example, they learned how to cast really good cannons from the Hungarians, and they learned how to use rifles from the Europeans. Now, another reason for the Ottoman success was their military organization. Their army was made up of 3 branches: infantry, cavalry, and artillery. Each branch was highly trained and disciplined, and they all worked together seamlessly to achieve victory. The Janissaries, for example, were an elite infantry unit that formed the backbone of the Ottoman army. They were handpicked from the best soldiers from all over the empire, and they underwent rigorous training to ensure that they were ready for any situation. Janissaries were often given special weapons and armor, and they were known for their bravery and skill in battle. Then there were the Spahis, who were the Ottoman cavalry. They were mounted archers who fought from horseback. And finally there was the artillery, which, as we mentioned earlier, was some of the best in the world. Together, these 3 branches formed a well-rounded military force that was capable of taking on just about anyone. However, there was still something missing. The Ottomans needed a way to project their power overseas. Fortunately, they found an answer in the form of the galley. The galley was a type of warship that was powered by oars, and it allowed the Ottomans to dominate the seas around their empire. With their powerful fleet, the Ottomans were able to control trade routes, transport troops quickly around the Mediterranean, and launch devastating attacks on their enemies. Yet another reason why the Ottomans were so successful was because of their religion. As the empire grew, it became more and more diverse. In fact, by the end of the 5th–10th century, the Ottomans ruled over people of at least 6 different religions: Sunni Muslim, Shiite Muslim, Saki, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Although there were tensions at times among the different religious groups, they generally lived together in peace. And that's because the Ottomans were relatively tolerant of other religions. In fact, they even had a special legal system for non-Muslims known as the millet system. Under this system, each religious community was allowed to have its own courts and laws. and as long as they paid their taxes, they were generally left alone. This religious tolerance helped to create a stable and prosperous empire. It also helped the Ottomans to grow because it meant that they didn't have to convert the people they conquered to Islam. Instead, they could just collect their taxes and leave them alone. But the final ingredient to the Ottoman success was their location. You see, the Ottomans were located at the crossroads of Europe, Asia, and Africa. This gave them access to trade routes that connected the three continents. In fact, their location was so strategic that they were sometimes called the sick man of Europe. That's because their empire straddled two continents and they often acted as a buffer state between the two. The Ottomans used their location to their advantage. They collected taxes on trade goods that passed through their territory, and they used that money to build their army and navy. So those are the 5 reasons why the Ottoman Empire expanded so quickly during the 15th century. Gunpowder, military organization, religious tolerance, the Gallian location. If any of these factors were different, it's likely that the Ottomans wouldn't have been able to conquer so much land so fast. Speaking of conquering land, the Ottomans weren't the only ones doing that during the 15th century. In fact, there were 3 other empires that were expanding at the same time. There was the Russian Empire, which stretched from the Baltic Sea in the west to the Pacific Ocean in the east. Then there was the Chinese Ming Dynasty, which covered everything from Mongolia to Vietnam. And of course, there was the Spanish Empire, which spanned from the Americas to the Philippines. These 4 empires were the largest in the world at the time, and they would continue to grow throughout the 16th and 17th centuries. So what does all this mean? Well, it means that the 15th century was a pivotal time in world history. It was during this century that the foundations were laid for the modern world. The political map of Europe was redrawn, and the balance of power shifted dramatically. The old order was being challenged, and new ideas and ways of doing things were emerging. It was a time of great upheaval and change, and yet it was also a time of great opportunity. Those who were able to adapt and take advantage of the changing circumstances did very well for themselves. So what do you think? Were you surprised by any of these reasons? Why do you think the Ottomans were so successful? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, then make sure to subscribe so you never miss an upload. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.